Right, good evening everybody. Welcome to the first lecture of the 2020-21 session for the Railways Division's North Eastern Centre. My name is Louise Shaw, I'm this year's chair, and I'm delighted to say that this evening we've got Angus Townley with us, who's going to be talking about the Crowle Peatland Railway. Now, as is the custom with these sorts of events, I've got a few parish notices which I have to give out to encourage you all to come to the next lectures and to make you aware of all the opportunities which are available to you. But before I go to those, I'd like to just take a moment to pause and reflect for a bit on the dreadful events that happened yesterday. And no doubt everybody is aware that a train derailed in the far north of Scotland, and in addition to 2 railway staff, 3 passengers were killed. That's the kind of event that we all dread happening. I can personally remember a number of events throughout my career that stand out, but thankfully very, very few. We've moved our industry on hugely in recent years in terms of safety of passengers and safety of rail staff. I think that's something of which we should all be proud, at the same time as being sad for those individuals and their families who were directly affected by the crash. I know it affects the ScotRail team and the rest of Team Scotland as well. These events are never taken lightly in any context by any company that's involved in these sorts of incidents. So I'm sure you'll be sharing with me my thoughts and deepest condolences to those involved, and to those also people who are affected in any way, shape or form by what's happened. Regrettably, it serves to remind us that in this time of changing environment, the kinds of decisions we used to make are no longer valid, and we have to reflect on the new normal and the conditions in we operate. It's also a credit to the professionalism of those railway staff who were able to get hold of the emergency services and the emergency services themselves. And I hope the stress that they're feeling at the moment is not too great for them. So, on to the proceedings for this evening. I hope you like the picture. This is the high level bridge, and in the background the blue structure is the QE2 bridge, which is the metro bridge. So we've got 2 major railway bridges, and just hiding behind them is the King Edward Bridge. So 3 fairly serious connections across the River Tyne, connecting the north and the south of the country. So that will be our picture for the rest of this year, and it's something I think it's all too easily forgotten compared with the coat hanger, which is the road bridge which goes across the River Tyne. So we'll be keeping with that picture for the rest of the year, and I hope you enjoy it. Upcoming events. So this is a bit of a different year. For the time being, until the end of this calendar year at least, all of the Railway Division Centres events will be virtual. And so rather than being only able to attend those events which you can get to, you can attend any events anywhere hosted by any of the centres. So on this screen you've got now are the list of the upcoming events for the next calendar month approximately. And you're free to attend any or all of those which you wish to do so. They are being run by the different centres, so you will have to do a little bit of poking about on the IMechE's Near You site to find them individually, but they are all there. They are all open to you to register and to attend as you wish. I shall be attending several of those myself, And in fact, it's a betterment in some ways, because there are a number of those kinds of lectures where in the past you've not been able to attend them, nor have I. And if you can't attend them, I think that we'll try to ensure as many of them as possible are available to view after the event as well. So 2 wins, which is excellent. Our own next event is not until the 30th of September, after the North Eastern Railway Engineers Forum, which the Railway Division plus PWI, IRSE and so on put on every year. And this year the subject matter is around rail enhancements for the North East. That's also advertised on the North East Railway Division Centre near you page, so if you'd like to go to that, please feel free to do so. You can also keep in touch with what's going on. We will be sending out programme cards very shortly, but in order to be sure that you will get one of these, if you're an IMechE member or you have an IMechE account, you can and must set your preferences up correctly in order to receive these programme cards. There are 2 things you need to do on your profile. One is on the industry tab to select railway, and on the second to select the correct mailing settings under your mailing profile preferences. For industry updates, yes, in post or in hard copy as well as email, and then you should receive a programme card. The other ways of keeping in touch are through Near You. We also have a LinkedIn group, and if needs be, there's also that email address there. And the Railway Division's website and Railway Division information is available using that link there. So plenty of ways of keeping in touch and following what we're doing. We do have a mailing list. If you would like to join that mailing list, please send an email to that rdnortheast@imeche.org, and we will add you to that list accordingly. So without further ado, I think I should introduce our speaker for this evening, who's Angus Townley. Angus has quite a history of engagement and involvement in the railway industry, having worked for Tata Steel for a long time, but also the subject of this evening is around the Crowle Peatland Railway, which is probably a railway that very few people have heard about. It's also kind of situation where not many people understand what it's like to try and operate a railway where the geography changes on a regular basis and the track gets moved around and the locos and the wagons have to cope with indifferent track quality, might we say. So I'm sure Angus has got a lot of interesting things for us to hear about, both in terms of the history of the area and the restoration of the parts of the railway, but also the STEM engagement with the local technical college and the practical skills that have been able to be employed by the students there. So that seems to me like an excellent way to create engineering interest and understanding amongst young people and help support them as well as them helping to support you. So without further ado, I think over to you, Angus. Sorry, before I do that, I should say, if you think of questions, please enter them as we go into the chat box, which you should be able to find. If you move your mouse, you should see some icons appear at the bottom of the screen. There's hover over the icons and you can see the different labels which pop up. Click on the one marked chat and you can type in a question into the question box, and we'll pick those up at the end if that's okay. If anybody gets into technical trouble, you can also use that chat box to raise that with us, and we'll endeavour to fix your technical issues. So without further ado, I think that's over to you, Angus. Thank you very much for helping us on this.
Okay, well, thank you for that kind introduction, Louise. I'll just set the presentation off. Well, good evening, and thank you for giving me. Sorry, I'm swapping the wrong screen. We should have the right screen now. No, it won't. No. in rehearsal, this worked perfectly. Sorry, let's start again and screen 2, there we go. Right, now you should see the presentation. Right, good evening, well, thank you very much for inviting me to talk about the Crowle Peatland Railway. We're a project within the sort of a Heritage Lottery funded project known as the Isle of Axholme and Hatfield Chase Landscape Partnership. And the Landscape Partnerships are projects funded by the Heritage Lottery Fund to try and encourage people to learn more about their local areas, both the history, the heritage, and other aspects. So the purpose of this talk is really just give you an overview of the history of the peat extraction and peat transport in the Humberhead levels, and then we'll sort of look at what's happening today with the Crowle Peatland Railway, how we were formed, and what we're doing to sort of preserve the history and heritage of the moors. So for those who aren't quite sure where we are when we talk about the Humberhead Peatlands area, the Humberhead Peatland are at the sort of the confluence of the River Ouse and the River Trent, which of course form the River Humber. And if we nip on to the next one, you can sort of see, I suppose to the west we have Doncaster, and to the east we have Scunthorpe, and the localities actually around the 2 National Nature Reserves, which form the Humberhead Peatlands National Nature Reserve, sort of Hatfield, Thorne, and you probably know Doncaster North Service Station on the M18, which is to turn off onto the M180. The area we're really going to talk about most tonight is the large peatland area to the north, known as, or collectively as Thorne Moors. Strictly, it's about 4 or 5 different moors, which include on the east side Crowle Moor, but you have the Thorne Moor, the main bit, and typically it gets referred to as Thorne Moor in totality. I mean, the moors themselves, as I've shown you there, are part of the Humberhead Peatland National Nature Reserve. Thorne Moors and the contiguous moors around it are the largest area of raised bog wilderness in lowland Britain, i.e. in England, and cover an area of about 2,887 hectares. And it is a large area of real wild sort of country that it's quite easy when you're driving along the motorway, the M180 there, or the M18, to actually be completely oblivious of its existence. It's in its entirety, it's been a National Nature Reserve since about 2000, but it's even before then it had a number of special designations, special sites of special scientific interest, special protection areas under the European Birds Directive, and special areas of conservation, the SACs, and the ecologists always spend lots of 3-letter acronyms trying to explain that. Lots of wildlife. I mean, the bird it's most well known for, and one of the reasons why it's got a lot of the designations, is the nightjar, which is a ground nesting bird that comes out at night to eat moss. But it's also a large herd of red deer, adders and grass snakes, and certainly natural England sort of established the moors as a centre of peatland excellence. In fact, most of the visitor engagement that natural England do is actually the southern moor, the Hatfield Moor, which is just slightly smaller than Thorne Moor, and therefore actually the development of Crowle Peatland Railway on Thorne Moor will actually hopefully encourage visitors to the northern moor, not just the south. I mean, I'll give you a sort of quick presentation on the history of the moors, actually how the moors, sort of peat extraction started, and how that's developed over time. Peat's sort of been extracted on the moors since medieval times, and this map is known as the Inklesmore map, and this was drawn somewhere in the first half of the 15th century. Depending on who you believe, it was drawn about 1407, and it was all to solve land ownership disputes on the north side of Thorne Moor. and this was because of the value of the peat extraction. And in fact, you can see from the plan the strips heading into the moors, and the peat was sort of taken out by wagonway, but they also had small streams and drains that they could take people out. In fact, you can see a sluice here at the end of this drain, managing water levels. In fact, the ownership documents or the disputes were all about this land, and effectively they sort of said, you know, you have this width of land as far as it goes into the moor, you know, it keeps going. And actually, the peat here was typically extracted. It was not just used locally. When it was loaded onto ships on the River Ouse here and taken to York, to Hull, and various other places. I mean, this map, which I did warn Louise I could talk about these maps for the whole night if you wanted me to, but they're wonderfully illustrated with sort of pictorial representation of the various villages and towns around the main moorland area. But this, the Inkells Moor, as it's marked on the map, is what we now know as Thorne Moor. Crowle is here, and this is the course of the River Trent, of course the River Ouse, as I mentioned, the River Aire, which will help to locate exactly where we are. The River Don, as we know it now, is here, but this also shows the former course of the River Don, which ran up past Crowle and into the River Trent at the River Trent at just near Trent Falls, where the Trent meets the Ouse. And in fact, you'll see from this map that the River Don is shown as flowing into the River Aire, just near Cowick. The current course of the River Don was redirected in 1630 as part of a correction to the drainage that took place at the time, and in fact it runs across into the River Ouse at Gould, and in fact, you know, had that, you know, that re-digging of the River Don there into the River Ouse, but Gould probably wouldn't have existed. In fact, Gould isn't on this map. It's the nearest place is Hook, which is shown here. So, part of that. Anyway, the only purpose of showing that map, apart from talking about it at length, was really to say, look, you know, the peat extraction, it's been going a long time, and as I mentioned briefly, the drainage. The other big changes that happened in the area in the 17th century, Cornelius of Mouden, a Dutchman, was contracted by Charles I to carry out some large-scale drainage of the area, and particularly the area to the south of here. The drainage of the area is quite an interesting subject, because there are a lot of, I mean, the original course of these rivers were probably redirected by the Romans, and in fact you go into the 17th and 18th centuries and you've got quite eminent engineers such as John Rennie and Smeaton, who were all sort of involved in various aspects of the drainage schemes to improve the drainage. But we're here to talk about peat and the railways. So peat, when we think about peat, we tend to think of peat being used as for heating or for fuel, or more recently as sort of in big plastic bags, and use that in the garden as a soil improver. However, over time, the peat that's been extracted from Thorne Moors have been used for a number of different applications, and heating, certainly until the 19th century, was probably the main use, and that was extracted both by locals who had common rights of turbary, but also, as I mentioned, that peat was taken and shipped to some of the large towns and cities in the area. At the beginning of the 19th century, or during the 19th century, by the mid-19th century, the big use of peat began to be animal litter, as horse transport in the large cities, London, Birmingham, Manchester, and so on, were increased. Then, of course, there were large stables that required something to put down on the ground, and obviously straw was quite a bulky material, and peat litter or animal litter, moth litter, was the material that was preferred, and this was sort of therefore taken out It was bundled up into very tight compressed bags, and as you'll see from the peat mills on the site, all of them had railway connections, and the peat was then taken by railway to the big centres, and some of the peat mills had contracts with the London omnibus, and I gather that even one of the peat mills had a contract to supply peat to the Paris omnibus system. And this chart, which I've borrowed from the Thorne and Hatfield Moors Conservation Forum, shows that you see the peak rate of extraction was about 70,000 tonnes a year just after the beginning of the 20th century, and that was all going to animal litter. And then, of course, the internal combustion engine in, and they completely lost that market, and the peat extraction diminished completely until the 1960s, when Physons took over and started using peat for horticultural purposes. Though interestingly, peat had already been used. There was a nursery where the chap was growing various types of plants and selling those onto the large gardens at the beginning of the 19th century on one side of the moor. So in fact, we have invasive rhododendrons, one of the big issues on the moors, and that's all as a result of this 19th century rhododendron growth. Now, interestingly, see, although large mechanised methods of peat extraction took place in the late 20th century, it never actually extracted as much as the peat used for animal litter. But because of the methods of change, actually, it was a much larger area was required to provide the peat. They weren't digging as deep, as you'll see from the methods of extraction. And traditionally, until quite late, actually, until the 50s and 60s, the traditional method was to dig the peat by hand. You would stack it. You would dig the peat in the summer, stack it to dry, stack the blocks of peat to dry, and as you can see on the top picture here, that you've got about sort of 4 or 5 foot of peat that you're taking in one go. We won't get into too much detail about the different methods. In the sort of 70s and 80s, they started to introduce machine methods of peat extraction, and these initial peat machine methods were still cutting blocks. So here you can see machine cut blocks, and you can sort of see quite a different face along here. So they were still digging deep, long panels of peat, which were then stacked to dry and then taken. This was replaced in the late 1980s when Physons began experimenting using what was known as a finish method, which was surface milling of peat. And this involved draining the area and then scraping off the top layer of vegetation to expose the peat. And then a mechanical harvester was used to skin off a thin layer of peat from the large area. And that granulated peat was dried because it was only a sort of surface dried, and therefore it could be taken to the peat mill to be bagged and perhaps added with a few fertilizer elements to sort of put straight into sacks without much further work. So of course, from their perspective or Physons' perspective, and you can see here at the top, they're just scraping off the top surface. Here, one of the machines putting in the deep drains going right through the peat, and here are some pictures which really show you the nature of a milled peat surface, which is mile upon mile of brown peat surface with no living items in it all. In fact, when I first sort of started to visit the peat moors, I can remember seeing large areas of peat, absolutely devastated, to be honest. And as I say, these are pictures taken, but fortunately, that is recovering. And as I mentioned about the end of the peat extraction industry, of course, it was this that really led to people really saying peat isn't the way forward. We should be actually looking at other methods to improve the soil in our gardens. So we'll have a look at methods of transport. So as mentioned, sort of it was the 1880s really when there was a big revival in peat extraction on the moors. There were several independent peat companies on Thorne Moor, and they started combining together. And it was about that time they started using horse-drawn rail lines. This, as I say, this shows one of the horse-drawn wagons at IMechE Hall, which is one of the peat works. Typical, the 3-foot 3-foot gauge railway, horse-drawn. You can see the young lad there behind helping that along. There were, as I say, as we'll see, there were several different peat mills. Each had their own individual systems, and originally sort of set their systems up at the 3-foot. IMechE Hall seemed to have the largest horse-drawn floor, and here you can see the hand-cut peat, quite large, in these open wood slatted wagons. Typical. This is a picture. This is actually relatively recent in that this probably dates from the 50s. And I was showing this presentation to some local WI, and one of the old ladies leapt up and told me that she knew this chap here. It was Joe Kempen, who was a very Dutch name, and he came across when the Greensveen Peat Company, or at least he was, his family had come across at the beginning of the 20th century. And the Greensveen Peat Company, a Dutch company, they came across and they set up a peat mill at Moor End on the Thorne side of the moors. And this was known as a paraffin work, because one of the things that they wanted to try and extract from peat was paraffin, just by basically squeezing it a lot. It wasn't particularly successful, but they brought their own peat extraction techniques. So you can see different methods of peat extraction on the moors where you can see the old ones. But they also used boat methods to remove peat. So they had a network of canals to remove the peat from the moors to the Moor End peat work. It ceased to be used in 1922 because the peat works had a major fire. And in fact, you can still see the remains of this aqueduct where it crosses the warping drain, the Macon-Durham's warping drain. But at the bottom, you can see how this is actually near the peat works itself, where you can see that you had the peat boats as well as the horses bringing the peat to the works itself. So just to say, this just gives you an idea of the sort of the extent of the peat canals, and it's quite interesting. You can from aerial photographs, it's quite a patchwork of different types of plant growth and so on in this area. I mentioned that obviously we had a number of peat works around the works. Around the peat moors. I mentioned peat, the IMechE Hall peat works, which was down here, and that was located on the main railway line between Doncaster and Scunthorpe, and that had sidings in there. The Moor End peat work, which is the one which was connected by the canal system, that had sidings off the main Doncaster Goole line up here, and we then had the Swinefleet peat works, which was sort of the last of the peat works remaining operating on the moors, and that was located just off the moors here. That was originally, interestingly, connected up to the River Ouse at Swinefleet Clough, where the Swinefleet walking drain meets the River Ouse, and that was connected by a 3-foot 7-inch gauge railway. And they actually had a steam locomotive. I always you know, insist to people that we never had steam locomotives on the moors because steam and peat railways and really just don't mix. But actually, there was a steam locomotive connected with peat extraction of Thorne Moors, and that was this 3-foot 7-inch gauge railway that ran up the warping drain. That was apparently constructed not long after 1886 when the peat works opened, and it was a 4-wheeled loco, apparently built in Goole by Webster Jackson and Co. However, that line will have closed just after 1900 because the Axholme Light Railway, which of course is no longer in existence, ran from the Doncaster Goole Railway across here, across the warping drain and down here, and that meant that cut off the ability of that particular railway to cross up to Swinefleet Clough, and there was sidings then put into the Axholme Railway to Swinefleet Peatworks. There was also a 3-foot gauge railway, which was horse work, that ran up to Old Gould Peatworks, which ran up here, and again that will have ceased operation on when the Axholme Joint Railway was built between 1900 and 1905. But you get a good feel for sort of the area that would work for peat here. You know, it's good, you know, 5 kilometres by 5 kilometres at least. And the other interesting thing you can see on the map, I sort of mentioned about the strips of land that sort of worked their way in from the edge of the moors where they were taking peat off, and you can see that the shape of the fields in the north sort of run this almost south. Sort of southwest northeast, and the thin strips are sort of because of the strips of peat that would have been taken out, and you can see similarly you've got the strips coming in from Thorne side, and in fact on Thorne side they're known as cable, and a cable was the width of each strip, and that was the Dutch term for a chain as used in measurement. And equally so on the Crowle side, you have what they call them ribbon rows, and there are lots of strips of ribbons coming in from the Crowle side. So you can sort of see how, you know, initially the peat area was far larger, and it's sort of then been reduced as people have worked the peat in the inland. So we've come on to probably what you've been waiting for, which is the history of the railways and the locomotive and so on. The first motive power that was used on Thorne Moors, the first accepted motive power, was a converted Austin Swallow car, apparently. In 1947, one of the mechanics, fed up having to cross the moors by foot or on his bicycle, apparently converted an Austin Swallow car so that it could run on the railway lines. It wasn't able to pull any wagons, so the fitters tended to use it for getting about, apparently. I gather it was finally scrapped in the 50s, but I'm yet to see a picture of it. I must admit, it's a shame. This is the first loco for which it was pictured. This was bought in second-hand in 54, 55, and it was manufactured by James and Frederick Howard of Bedford and scrapped in 1959. And that only had 31 horsepower, but you can see that even then they're still using these wooden slatted-sided wagons here. And this is a visit of one of the local Methodist chapels to the moors, or the Congregational Chapel, I think, from Goole. As I say, I don't intend to go through quite every loco they had, but just show you a sort of a range of the different locos. This is a Ruston and Hornsby loco. It was the first loco to be delivered new to Swinefleet Works, and that arrived on the 3rd of July 1959, which, you know, you think of ancient railways that have been restored and things. Actually, in terms of motive power, we're quite a recent railway. But this only had 31.5 horsepower. And for the original block methods, that you can see again, we've got a slatted side wagon, but this is one of the steel wagons they ordered off Hunslet. The previous ones were wooden framed, so I think they bought about 250 of these wagons for both Hatfield and Thorne Moors. But as you can see, these can be tipped up and emptied with tipplers. Again, this is Sheba. This is one of the other named locos. There were apparently a total of about 22 locos used on Thorne Moors, and perhaps a bit easygoing about whether we use on Thorne and Hatfield. You find that the locals, although there was no rail connection between the two moors, that because they were operated by the same the same company, they would actually swap locos about between the moors. So this actually just shows Ruston and Hornsby, and again the metal. So some of them did have names, and this is Sheba. And in fact, they even made their own locomotives. And this is Feisson's own locomotive that they used a kit of parts supplied by Diemer of Germany. And as you can see, it's quite a small, lightweight loco. And this was underpowered for mainline use, and therefore that it was mainly used by plate layers when they were laying tracks. And as you can see, the plate layer one. Now, I don't know, the keen eyes of you might have noticed there's two chassis on that that loco. Well, they rebuilt the loco in 1986 using the frame of a previous team loco that they'd had. And I guess to give it extra weight, they put both frames together on this loco. And we therefore have, I think it was described in one of the histories of the Moors as an inelegant looking locomotive, but there's a sort of interesting loco. Then this is one of the 5 simplex locos, or that they had simplex motor rail locomotives that operate on the moors. And so these, I guess, were starting to be the last of the small locos that they bought. These were 40 horsepower. There were 5 of these motor rail locomotives. I think 3 of them were bought second hand, and 2 were bought new for the moors themselves. The other type of loco that they used on the moor, the Swinefleet peat works in the background here. And by now, the wagons have changed. So these wagons are the bin wagons. Now, see, when they changed from the block cut peat to the milling of peat, where you effectively you mill a fine powder, of course, you can't put the fine powder into the previous wagons you saw, which had the slatted sides. So, of course, what they did, they took the chassis off the old slatted side wagons and replaced them with steel bin wagons, like here. In fact, you might find those are actually some of the remains of some of the slatted wagons in the background there. But this is, say, Swinefleet peat works at the top. Now, the other locos that we used on the moors were the little Lister locos, and they had about 4 or 5 of these. And so where they were on a panel where they were cutting the peat blocks, or flat as they would call that thing, they would lay down a lightweight Jubilee track, and then they would just be able to pull in the wagons to load using the Lister diesel locos, which, as you can see, are very lightweight construction. You couldn't really save much more weight on that loco. And typically they would leave these locos out on the moors. They wouldn't bother to bring these back at the weekends or when they stop work. And in the background, you can see obviously one of the trains. Now, we obviously mentioned the change of peat extraction technique, and that meant as I showed you, they changed the types of wagon, but it also meant that the small locos that they had until then just weren't powerful enough for the job that they required. So there's this rather sad picture here. Not the saddest picture I've seen. In fact, the saddest picture I haven't actually even put on the put in this presentation. Brings a tear to my eye to see a loco that gets used as a buffer stop and rather smashed to bits. So I haven't put that in this presentation. But these were there's actually 5 locos in this picture. In the far end, you've got a Lister. Here you've got Sheba. You've got a Hundlet loco here. You've got Tanya, one of the Ruston and Hornsby locos, and Simba, one of the other Ruston and Hornsby locos at the front here. Now, these 5 locos, they spent a few years sort of on a bit of a siding just outside Swinefleet Peat Works, but these were actually bought, or 4 of these locos were bought by Cliff Lawson of Tring and re-gauged to 2'6", where he preserved them. So the last locos, as I say, with the new thing, they needed bigger, more powerful locos. So in fact, the early 90s, 1991, they introduced these German locomotives, Skoma, if you want to use the English pronunciation, which are diesel hydraulic locomotives. They have obviously the main loco drive unit, but they also have these slave units behind. So that the slave units have exactly the same hydraulic motors as in the locomotives, the front locomotive, and they're driven from the hydraulics from the locomotive, so that you've got obviously twice the traction. And as you can see, that the plates on the slave units are actually very heavy. So it means the slave unit's actually as heavy as the locomotive. And these are, as I say, just some of those, the Sherman locomotives. There were 3 of these locomotives bought in all, and 2 of them were uprated at the end of the 1990s. And this is just a picture of a rake of the wagons at Top Bank, which is one of the sites on Thorne Moor. This shows loco running round the run round loop at the Swinefleet Peat Works. As you can see, very rural, almost stepping straight into a field there. And this shows the other loco, one of the other locos coming off the moor. If you remember back when we looked at the map of where the peat works were, it was slight distance from the moor. So there's this long straight run to the warping drain where the rail turns left. And this is obviously the Thomas Buck, one of the Shomer locomotives, bringing in wagons loaded with peat. Typically, they would actually pull up to 40 of these peat wagons at one time. And again, you can sort of see this rather sad collection of locos awaiting their fate, which fortunately wasn't as bad as other locos had. So there's only one loco which we have, which carries the nameplate, the Thomas Buck, and it was actually named after this chap who was one of the plate layers. And apparently they could point him in a direction, and before you know it, you'd have several miles of track laid down. He was obviously quite well regarded, and we still have that loco here. After sort of peat extraction finished, the Levingtons, or Scots as they were by then, put the locos into storage at the back of their Hatfield Peat Works. So this is the locos in storage. Mentioned obviously the full range is sort of the original peat railway sort of radiated out from the different peat works. And at the peak, after they'd all joined up together, there was probably about 25 miles of rail network on the peat moors covering different areas. Obviously, that's a mixture of permanent lines that they had for obviously getting the peat off, and temporary lines that you'd have in to work particular areas of the moors. Full list of the locos there. I won't go through those, but I've just highlighted the locos that we still have. So why did peat extraction finish? Well, part of the reason, I guess, a lot of people would say that the survival of the peat moors in Thorne really down to this chap, William Bunting. in 1962, South Yorkshire Council, they were discussing a plan to dump fuel ash from the power stations on the moors, because the moors were seen as wasteland that have no value at all, and therefore why not dump fuel ash all over them? And in fact, they were then going to also put mining slag on them, and there were several plans for an international airport to be built on the site. I think initially in 71, then 76, and with the proposal to reopen Thorne Colliery, as I say, they were going to dump the waste from Thorne Colliery. But it was, to be honest, it was down to perseverance of this chap, William Bunting, and his group of sort of proto-ecologists who were known as the Bunting's Beavers, who would go and every time Scots or Levingtons, or was it Fisons at the time, so I forget quite the dates. But anyway, when the operators would put in the large drains to drain the area, they would go and completely fill up put in dams to block these drains so they couldn't drain the areas. And apparently these dams were so well built, the only way that the peat extraction company could get rid of them was by using explosives. But inevitably there were more and more protests against the peat extraction. And again, you can see from this picture here really the devastation that the large-scale milling for peat, as opposed to the block cut peat, which was historically what happened, which actually is almost self-sustaining. This sort of I guess but we're talking to the 90s now, and there were quite large public outcry against peat extraction, and you'll probably all be aware of the not to use peat from your garden centres, and really the result of that, in 2000 the government bought out the mining rights for peat from Scots for about £17 million, and apparently that made them at the time the most expensive national nature reserve that the Natural England bought at the time. Although that took place in 2000, they continued to remove the stockpiles of peat till about 2005. So there was still locos running in 2005 or thereabouts. Well, that's when it all came to an end completely. And after the peat extraction stopped, this is a picture of one of the Natural England managers, and Bob Ashton there in the middle, who he was looking at what could be done to help preserve the heritage moors. And in fact, when they were looking at it, he was looking at doing something from the Thorne side. There was still a lot of the lines laid down. So you can see here one of the main routes across the moor. And in fact, as Louis mentioned earlier, of course, they're not the most most stable of tracks, and apparently, derailments were quite a regular occurrence. In fact, almost daily. I quite like this one with Thorne Colliery, the distinctive headgear Thorne Colliery in the background, showing the lines that were sort of left. So the present, really, I mean, the moor is starting to regenerate. It is greening. It's an aerial shot from Google, and the water, is attracting a lot of wildlife back. So in addition to the nightjars, for which the moors were originally listed, they now have cranes. They actually have breeding cranes on the moors, and they weren't introduced cranes. They were cranes that actually made their own way to the moors themselves. Now, this is Banktop. This is a maintenance shed at Banktop, and like all good ideas, we were sat round in a pub, and like all good railways, of course, it always starts in a pub, and we were talking about the peat extraction industry. It would have been about 2013, and they sort of said, well, yeah, there's still a locomotive sat on the moors, the maintenance shed on Top Bank, and and this is it. This is the Simplex logo that was still there on Top Bank. It wasn't, Natural England hadn't quite forgotten about it because they knew it was in their list of assets, but it was just they hadn't got any intention to do anything with it at the time. And along with it was a bit of the peat winning equipment, some length of track. I mean, so this loco, it was 40S302 was the works number from Motor Rail. It was one of the 5 Motor Rail locos that Phison's had. And it had originally started life on on Hatfield, but moved to Thorne in '94. There was it was prompted by engine failure, and it certainly all the photographs you see of it from '97 show it as derelict and just looking more and more sad. But we thought, there's a loco there, we can do something with it. And as I say, the loco was originally delivered to Hatfield with a lower cab, but because this was hard work for the operator to get in and out of, the cab was extended. Did that. So this is actually a picture of the loco immediately after it had been extended at Hatfield Works. But there were also other bits and pieces to remind people about the peat railways on the moors. This is a beware of train sign, which unfortunately I don't think is there anymore. So we had this discussion in the pub, and we thought, we've got to do something about this loco. And at the same time, the Landscape Partnership were just about to kick off, and we were able to be one of the larger projects within that. The Landscape Partnership had 17 different projects, and they range from study of the flax industry, easier access to the moors, and the Peatland Railway, and Peatland Railway safe on the figure. So we recovered the loco, obviously with the permission of Natural England. We did pay our nominal £1 for the loco. We recovered it to one of the local farms for safekeeping, and we were then considering where could we set up some form of museum, some sort of railway to help preserve this history and heritage horse. One of the things we briefly considered, though not for very long, I must admit, was the Swinefleet Peat Works itself, because by then it wasn't being used for peat, but it was in such a poor state that and very difficult to get to, that it really didn't make sense. However, through the Scottish and Southern Energy, through the Wind Farm Fund, we were able to get money to build our own maintenance shed, which is actually based on the Simmer shed adjacent, which was used for peat work on Crowle Moors side of things. I didn't mention Thorne Moors was very much one large operation. Crowle Moor, I think because of ownership issues, remained very much operated by small peat workers. So in fact, this site was a peat works, but it was just a small privately owned site run by the Crowe family. But it had become North Lincolnshire Council property, and they were able to lease us the land. We have it on a 50-year peppercorn lease, and we were able to get the money from Scottish and Southern Energy to build the shed. The loco itself, we were able to take it to, or the local technical college, North Lindsey College in Scunthorpe, took it as a project for their engineering students to work on. And this shows it actually with arrival, with Mel Bailey, our chairman, on the right there, and some of the students looking excited, I hope, but getting it. Now, we didn't know what state this was going to be. All we knew was the loco had been abandoned, and we thought we were a bit concerned that the engine would be completely, unusable. But obviously they took it all apart, and it appeared it was all down to the bearings on the axles that the loco wasn't in a position to move. In fact, the engine itself, despite having been for the best part of 25 years sat doing nothing on the moors, was actually in good order. I mean, clearly the oil had kept it in good condition. As I say, the college basically disassembled it, cleaned it up. You can see, put some undercoat on it for us. Then they returned it to our shed, maintenance shed, at the beginning of the year, with the intention of assembling it in our maintenance shed using our facilities, as they sort of added to their experience of working in other workshops. However, unfortunately, we were then hit by COVID. So unfortunately, the students weren't able to continue that, and nor for that matter were we until about a couple of months ago. And we have been started to reassemble it, and as you can see, it's now starting to go back together. Rather large puzzle, and that's Ian, our volunteer, who's sort of looking after putting it back together. The engine system just to the right of the photo is next to go in, and hopefully that will be running. If not this year, it'll be early next year. The other locos we have with the Peatland Railway, the 3 Schomer locos. These were originally specifically designed and manufactured by Sherman in Germany for use on Thorne and Hatfield Moors, though 2 of them were refurbished in the late 1990s and had their 5-cylinder engines changed for 6-cylinder engines, and the horsepower uprated. But one of our younger members spotted the locos for sale in Norfolk. They were being sold by a trader in Norfolk, and he was obviously, I think he'd probably hoped to re-gauge them, but obviously, as they've got big hydraulic motors on the axles, they're not so easy to re-gauge as perhaps a diesel locomotive is. So, with the funding from some funding from the council and some funding from the Landscape Partnership, we were able to recover the 2 locos from Norfolk and 3 of the slave units. He had 3 of the slave units, so 2 of them. One of them had been used for spare, so it didn't actually have the wheels attached. But there, we were able to run some open days, and we've been slowly restoring them, as you can see in the shed. We have now laid about 100 metres of track, and this again, Mel, our chairman, showing his skills in a dumper truck. Our P-Way team laying the track. And then we were then offered by I forget their name now, something horticulture, the company who'd sort of taken on the Hatfield Peat Works. Hatfield Peat Works no longer take peat from Hatfield Moors, but the company that own it bring in peat from abroad and then repackage it and bundle it to send off to UK sites. Now, they had at the entrance to their works this loco, which is actually 2129, and strictly wasn't the Thomas Buck, because obviously when they put the loco here, they took the nameplate off the real loco that was Thomas Buck and put it on this loco. So we were able to, they basically said we no longer wanted it, it's getting in the way at our gate, and we were able to acquire that for nothing. So we now have 3 of the diesel hydraulic locos. And here's Will, who's our volunteer, looks after the locos, just giving one of them a rundown. And as you can see, we've got one of the peat wagons in the back there. There's the 2 that we got from Norfolk, Thomas Buck and the Schomer, the other one. This is just showing the slave units behind. You can see the thickness of the plate in that. There's all 3 logos. And I will just finish by mentioning our latest acquisition, which you say, what on earth are you showing me a picture of the Lisbon tram for? Well, of course, when they ran the peat, when the peat works didn't have any form of transport for taking personnel on the locos. Of course, one of the things as a heritage railway, we do want to be able to give people rides on behind the tram. And it happened that it turned out someone down in Essex had actually imported a number of Lisbon trams, which are 900mm gauge. Obviously, we're 3 foot 914, so within the suitable. So we now have the Lisbon tram 711. They are the actual chassis and the engine side of it were built in Wolverhampton by Maley and Troughton. Though the woodwork, the actual superstructure was built by Carris, the Lisbon Tram Company. And what I've forgotten is that actually I haven't got the date they went into service. But we only acquired this about 2 months ago, and we will be starting to restore that, and hopefully be in a position to give people a visit. It's a lovely interior. It's a lovely wooden interior. It really has a nice feel to it. We've also been doing, obviously, a lot of work on the history. We've been doing oral histories. We've been recording people who worked on the moors, both with the locomotives and both peat extraction. We're using that to help record the history. As I say, to finish further information, there's a brilliant book by Adrian Booth about the peat railways of Thorne and Hatfield Moor, a few of the photographs. And if you're interested about the mechanised peat winning side of it, Martin Limbert and Peter Rousted. And Martin Limbert, his MPhil, which is downloadable from the University of Leeds, I can't remember which university it is now. You can, he's actually got quite a good history of the peat working on the moors. And there's a beautiful sunrise picture I took at about 4:30 earlier this year of the moors. And there we are. Hopefully, I've not overrun too long. I do apologise, I have overrun, but I hope you found it interesting. Oh, and don't forget the open days in September. There you are.
Thank you very much, Angus. And you're absolutely right. Never forget the open days, never forget the free opportunity to advertise your wares. So, thank you, Angus. Right, so now the floor is open for questions. And this is where it gets technically interesting to me to try and find out where to look for all the questions.
I think I've got to stop sharing.
That might be the way to do it.
Yeah.
Okay. Not do anything. All right.
59 attendees. Can I start with a question then?
Yes, please do, Derek.
Derek.
Angus, how many peat railways are there in England, please? I'm aware of one in Ireland, of course, big one.
Well, it is. I'll wave another book. The Moseley Railway Trust produced years ago. They produced as part of their Industrial Narrow Gauge Railway Heritage Series, Peat Moss Railways of Great Britain. And I was surprised how many there were. But you have railways in Devon, Somerset, Norfolk, South Wales, Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire, Cheshire, Manchester, Merseyside, Lancashire, Yorkshire, Northumbria, Scottish borders, mid-Scotland, northern Scotland, Western Isles, all over the place. I mean, I don't think any were quite as extensive as those on Hatfield and Thorne Moors, but I do stand to be corrected.
How many then are actually preserved, as it were, like yours are?
None, as far as I'm aware. Keep reading about various closures. I think that various locomotives have been preserved. We've had several people contact us from the Netherlands. In fact, we had a couple of visits last year from peat railways preserved in the Netherlands and Germany. So there's a number of Tuffbahn, I think, is the German, and the Dutch is not far off that. So they're certainly on the continent, the number, and of course there's number in Ireland. Of course, you've got the Borden Amona,
yes,
which of course they're running down now, and everyone says, why aren't you going over there to get three-foot gauge equipment from Northern Ireland? But it's balancing obviously the needs, and having got a Lisbon tram, we would say our focus, because we want to focus on the heritage of Thorne and Hatfield Moors, the peatland, the Humberhead peatland, and will not really become a generalist sort of peat railway. But I'm sure that won't stop us acquiring one or two items that aren't from the Humberhead peatlands.
Have you considered, having had visitors from the other side of the North Sea, have you considered a twinning arrangement with them?
We've certainly considered that, and we'll look at ways that we can do that. I think what we need to do is arrange a visit over to see some of these peat railways in the Netherlands and Germany, and then actually do that. But yeah, no, we see that very much as a way of sharing knowledge and also generating people to come and visit the area.
Indeed, that's a very good way forward, certainly.
Yeah, no, yeah, good point.
Okay, in which case it's my turn to ask you a very focused question. You showed us two different types of wagons, Angus. There's some open slatted for when the peat blocks were being cut, and then what looked to me just like
big metal
plain box wagons.
Yes.
How were the two different sorts of wagons discharged once the peat trains had reached where the works facilities were?
Okay, well if you saw as I say, if you saw the slatted side wagon, the metal slatted ones that they bought from Hunslet had side doors that obviously they just needed to tip them. But at both Hatfield and Swinefleet peat works, they had tipplers that could tip the bin wagons completely upside down.
Okay.
Presumably were the couplings left intact? It's a bit like the big.
No. Well, in fact, no. They were disconnected. In fact, actually, the other way that they emptied them, and in fact, latterly was how they was into a forklift truck. They had forklift trucks that sort of clamped the wagons, lifted them, then flipped them over. Then they would drop them back onto the rail, and they sort of had an extra wide bit of rail so they could drop the wagon on. Then they had to be connected back up.
Okay.
And in fact, I'm sure I could find a picture of them doing that.
No, it's all right.
Okay. And the second question from
I was
me.
going to ask you earlier about the fact that the white flowers look like cotton, but you answered the question because you indicated that in fact they were flax. Is that correct?
No. Sorry, no. Those white flowers are cotton grass.
Oh, they are.
Oh, okay.
Cotton grass, which is one of the main things you get in peat areas. Actually, on that picture of cotton grass, I should have pointed out that in the foreground you've got the cotton grass and the peat moors, and then in the background you can just make out Drax Power Station, which was the largest single point emitter of carbon dioxide in the country. And of course, one of the things that peat moors are large peat carbon dioxide stores. So I always think that's quite a nice contrast, having Drax in the background. But of course, now Drax is powered by wood pellets, which whether or not that is better for the environment or not is another discussion entirely.
Don't go down there.
That's a long story. Angus, you mentioned about the steam locomotives being used on the peat moor and the potential fire risk.
Right. Okay. On the moors themselves, they didn't use the peat railway. They didn't use the steam railway. It was only on the line that linked the peat works to Swinefleet Clough on the River Ouse. That was the one sort of excuse they used it. Actually, I've noticed there are some other questions coming up on the Q&A session at the bottom. Someone was asking who owns the land now. Natural England do. You and I do, through the government, I guess.
Okay, we might be having some challenges. Natalie, can you help here with the questions? Because I'm not seeing the questions that Angus is. Can you give us some help here, please, Natalie?
No.
Sorry, hi there. Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes, I'm not seeing the questions that Angus has evidently seen.
So they are coming through the chat function and also through the Q&A.
Yeah, I'm not seeing them at all. I can see some comments from earlier on and a query, how do I get to answer a question, but I'm not actually seeing individual questions.
They might have gone directly to Angus. If are sending them straight to Angus, and it won't be visible.
Okay, fine.
It's okay. I can read the questions out. Okay. What length are we aiming to lay, and when do we expect to be ready? Okay. At the moment, we've got about 100 metres of track laid from the shed down to the end of that purple land. We are currently having going through the process of getting planning permission to lay another 400 metres. As you can appreciate, being on a triple SI and a National Nature Reserve, we actually have to go through quite tough. In fact, the hold up on the planning at the moment is that there needs to be further ecological studies done, but it looks as though we're nearly there, and we hope that that will be laid certainly by mid next year. What land do we have? How many volunteers do we have, and how many of them are qualified engineers and technicians? Well, we would like more volunteers, and we would certainly like more qualified engineers. Yeah, we have about 50 members. You can go to our website and join, of which we probably have about 25 active members. Who sort of volunteer. We have work parties on Saturdays, and some of our retired members come in on a Wednesday to do other work. And yes, some of those are qualified engineers. We could always do with more. But yeah, certainly I think they're all enthusiasts. They wouldn't be members otherwise. So is there any other? I mean, if you put it in the chat or the Q&A. How many volunteers? That's right. Yeah, that's it. Let's see if I can come out. Oh, where precisely is our depot? That's a very good question. It's not at Thorne Moor end. That would actually provide quite. That would actually be quite more difficult. We're on the Crowle side. We're actually on Crowle Moor.
Okay.
And the strictly the actual plot of land that we're on, what was the Crowle Peat Works, never had a rail line on it, although there were rail lines on Crowle Moors. So I think the agency suggests that there may have been a handwork line at one time, but not for very long, if there was.
Okay.
Yes, and adders is definitely a problem, and you've got to wear stout boots. There are some. That's certainly one of the things we make people aware of when we give them their health and safety induction when they start as volunteers. There are some bog oak around the site where you can, if you know at the right time, you creep up slowly enough, you can actually see adders. But I mean, they are. I mean, you because of the nature of the area we're on, we're actually quite constrained about things, you know, and there's things like light and noise we've got to take a lot of careful in. Flooding events. Okay, well, strictly not. There wasn't flooding where we are. The moors themselves, actually, there's a lot of re-wetting of the moors. The Natural England are re-wetting the moors with the help of the consultant engineers in Doncaster. And that's all actually about providing a reservoir for sort of extreme water cases. We've not flooded on that site, but the planning conditions that we have to work to is that we have to ensure that the floor of our buildings are more than 4 meters above ordnance datum. And to be honest, if there's going to be flood 4 meters above ordnance datum there, I'm not going to be anywhere near there. So yeah, so I mean, yes, flooding. I mean, we are certainly in a flood risk zone, and therefore that is something that has been taken into account. But I do sometimes think they're a bit extreme. The other feature was it might derail. It was a regular occurrence and part of life. That's quite right. Yes. We're hopefully trying to avoid that. Yes, and develop safe techniques for re-railing locos and wagons. Hard flooding. What's the future of the railway? Well, obviously we hope to extend the line. Our original business plan was, you know, and had we set up a site in the bank top, we would have liked to have been able to use it to enable people who have sort of mobility issues, you know, in wheelchairs or not able to get out, to actually be able to go out to the middle of the moors. But because of the nature of the environmental safeguards in the moors, that's probably very unlikely in the near future, though you never know. Slowly, you might catch a monkey and all that.
Going back to the tram, Angus, it was obviously, when it was in service, electric. How are you intending to power it?
It'll be used as a carriage. It'll just be pulled by one of the locos.
So, yeah.
We have. Actually, when we were setting up our safety management system and so on, we did have a visit by the Chief Inspector for Railways, Brackets Heritage, whose name has completely slipped my mind at the moment. So we did go through some of these.
Okay.
I think overhead lines were clearly something we would never have, but of course at that time we hadn't even considered the tram. So.
Okay.
Does the name Oliver Bullied mean anything to you?
I'm afraid not. No, doesn't to me.
It does to me.
I thought it might do, Richard.
What's the connection?
Mr. Bullied developed a peat burning steam locomotive.
Oh, yes, he did. Yes, he did.
Okay.
Yes, very good. Yeah.
Well, that's one thing I'm pretty sure we won't be allowed to run on. In fact, I showed you the picture of Hatfield Moor. In fact, Hatfield Moor had quite a major fire this year. We had, which actually devastated about a third. But it's surprising how quickly the Moor rebuilt. And it's actually one of the uses of the peatland railways when the peat was being extracted was taking the fire brigade on when there were fires.
Yes. Okay, so Louise, am I going to do a vote of thanks to Angus?
Well, I was just going to add, there's a little comment coming from Mick Crabtree, which might help bolster Angus's knowledge on the tram in the comments box, which was that there's a particular brake system.
Yeah.
So that can be added into your
it has. It's got 3 different
collection of knowledge.
Yes, it's got 3 different brake systems on it. It's quite complex.
Well, to be fair, Lisbon is quite hilly, so you might want to have more than one brake system in your vehicle. Right.
But Mr. Crabtree is actually viewing this. He's a very good person who used to work at Doncaster and he's an expert on trams.
He is an expert.
And he's corrected me. It's called Bailey and Taunton. I said Troughton. I think I was. That's from memory.
There we go. You have to mind your P's and Q's when you do these kinds of things. There's always somebody that knows better than you do. Right. Indeed, I think it's probably time for us to draw this to a close. So,
okay.
Richard, you kindly volunteered to do this vote of thanks. Yes. Before you do, I would just like to say particularly thank you to both to Angus, but also to Natalie and the HQ team, who's been sitting quietly in the background helping us put this on. As our first event, this is something of an adventure for all of us. So thank you, Natalie, for bearing with us whilst we make all the mistakes that you've seen everybody else making all the time that somebody's done this for the first time. So, over to you. Thank you.
So it falls to me, Angus, to thank you. I've been full of surprise tonight because I had some idea what to expect, but I mean we've covered so much. We've covered nightjars and cranes, and it's been really good to learn about what's going on there. I think this experience, our first virtual presentation, needs brave and bold attitudes because none of us have really done it before, and you've really risen to the challenge, and it's been fabulous. We've talked about the new normal. Well, I want to say a special thanks to you, but what I think we ought to do is we ought to come as a centre and visit you on one of your open days, and I'm sure that we could do that, can't we, Derek?
We have got a planned visit next June.
Yeah,
lovely.
As I say, wouldn't necessarily have to. We would certainly be more than happy to welcome you. Especially welcome you if you it wouldn't have to be on one of our open days.
Well, yes, I mean we'd love to come and see what you've done and learn about what you've achieved. And I see that there are 27 attendees tonight, so it's a reasonable turnout, and I think it's been a great success. And I mean, we can't clap you, or can we? Can we clap you? So thank you very much. It's been great fun and it's been very informative. And thank you to the IMechE.
Right, yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you.
There's a message from Peter Hardiman.
Thank you, Richard.
Okay, you're welcome.
So, last thing from me this evening. Please do keep in touch. We've got now several ways to do so, both passively seeing what we're putting out and also actively telling us what you think. Do take the chance to respond to what we put out, and please tell us if you like what you're seeing or you like what's in the programme. Please tell your friends, tell us, because that's always gratifying. But also please tell us what you'd like to hear about, because we think about what to put in the programme, where to go, and what which lectures to put on, and what kind of events you'd like. We do think about that actively, so if you think of something, just jot it down and we'll endeavour to put it in the plan. So, thank you very much, everybody.
Okay.
I can't say save Josie, because I normally would, but I can't say that tonight, because you're probably all at home as it is. Otherwise, take care, and we'll look forward to seeing you either on the 15th of September or on the 30th of September, or at one of the other centres' lectures in between then and now. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, Tim. See you then.